Greetings, family. Welcome to the AfrikanExodus show. I'm your host, Trini Cherie. We are in the Conspiracy to Erase a Nation segment. This segment is around a book that I wrote earlier this year, Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. The book is available on Amazon. If you would like a free mini PDF version of that book, you can go to my Telegram. The link is in the description. Very easy app to download. Essentially, it's inside of a pinned comment on the top of the page, and also it's pinned in a comment on my Patreon as well. Today, we're going to end off our part of this book series where we've dealt with Esau. We've talked really for weeks now. We started talking about really the relationship between Jacob and Esau. We started talking about how the Jewish religion was founded. We started talking about what the Dead Sea Scrolls tell us about how the religion was originally identified by the adherents of that religion. They themselves recognized that it was a convert religion. We spoke about that, and we also spoke about tracing these people from Palestine to different places throughout East Africa, Africa at large, and eventually into Europe. Today we're going to bring that to a close, but I do want to just hit on a few more points just because of some of the comments that were under the previous video that we did, talking about the Sephardic Jewish relationship to the slave trade. Now, I want there to be an understanding that although there's different understandings of the Sephardic Jews, the people who were inside of Spain, whether or not they were truly Israelite, whether or not they were Jews, basically, as we always recognize them as being Jews, I want to just give more understanding as far as my position. Again, my position is that they were not Hebrews, but they were, in fact, practices of Judaism, who have their origin story inside of that original religion that comes out of Palestine. But again, if you know that by now, Palestine is not Yasharel. So because that is who we can recognize them as being, and I'm going to give you a little bit more information about why I came to that conclusion. Because of that, then that means that the plight, the Inquisition, the plight that caused them to go into different places in the world, some of them went into Africa, others of them went into Europe, others of them went into the Middle East. That dispersion is not our dispersion. Now, I understand that that is not a view that everyone shares inside of the Hebrew Israelite movement, inside of the awakening, whatever you want to call it. I understand that many people are of the view that no, the Sephardic Jews, those are the tribe of Judah. And essentially, that's who people who went through the transatlantic slave trade descend from. So I disagree again. And if that's your view, then, there's no need to beef over it. I do want to have you understand for yourselves, everyone, so that you can research for yourselves why I am adamant that that's just not the case. So number one, again, whenever you're talking about who are the Hebrews, we have to be wary of the fact that there are already a people who have made that claim inside of the world system that we are in. There are already people who are known on the world stage as being Hebrews or being Jews, being people who are Jewish, right? So because of that, throughout history, we're going to find that it's very hard to identify and make a separation between which people actually come from Jacob, which people actually come from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and which people converted to a religion, and that religion is the religion we call Judaism today. So it's hard to make that distinction because all throughout history, the Europeans have identified there being a Jew, being a Jewish people, but we have to understand to them, they were not pointing to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob when they identified people who are Jews. Instead, they are pointing to the idea that this religion is a people and the people have a bloodline of their own, but the religion is really the stamp, the mark that we can identify them as. So anytime that I came across, whether it was research for this book or just research for my own edification, anytime I came across people who are identified as being Jews, but they're inside of Africa, or they're inside of the Caribbean, or they're inside of the Americas, or they're different places. It's the mere fact that they were identified by mainstream scholarship as being Jews automatically gives me the belief that probably they are coming from Judaism and not from the original adherents of the Torah, the people who we know are the Hebrews who were scattered to the four winds of the earth. And we have to remember that, of course, a big part of this conspiracy is taking the identity of the real Hebrews and giving it to another people. So mainstream scholarship, entire institutions and universities are built on this belief. And so you'll even see, for example, whenever you are looking at academia, there is a recognition that Jews went all over the earth, including in Africa. There is a common recognition of that. But you have to understand, whenever it's coming from mainstream Jewish sources, they're saying that, yes, these are our people. These are our people who went into these different places of the earth. Now, they could be lying, but what we have to do is figure out whether they're lying or not. And so I think that the biggest thing that you could do to parse out all of this jumbled information, who's Hebrews, who's not, you people say you are, you people say you are, who's telling the truth? The biggest way to parse through that is to understand that there has to be a separation between who is Jewish and who is a follower of Yahuwah, particularly of the Torah, the people who come from Yasharel. Now, here are the things that I came across that gave me the conclusion, that led me to the conclusion, that as far as the Sephardic Jews, including the ones before the Inquisition, they were not Hebrew. Things that actually led me to that is the fact that when you study that community in Spain, again, prior to the Inquisition, and obviously after the Inquisition, as they go throughout Europe and also throughout Africa, they were not following pure Torah. They were practicing Judaism, the same Judaism that comes from Palestine. And really the mark of Judaism, rabbinical Judaism, the mark of that you can kind of tell where people are, is literally going to be found from people who practice from the Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud is a book that is revered inside of rabbinical Judaism as being scripture. We know, however, if you've studied, and I hope you have, you should know that the Babylonian Talmud is not a book that really comes from Yah. It's a book that comes from, you could say, the Revelations 2:9 folk. You could say it comes from the people who have said that they are a certain people, but are not. Now, how do we know that the Babylonian Talmud does not come from us? Well, the clearest indication of that fact is that the Talmud literally says explicitly that people who are Black are cursed. This is where the curse of Ham originates from. People who are Black are cursed. And the reason why they're cursed is because they're all descendants of Ham, which is an inaccuracy, right? Because not just Ham was Black, but Shem was Black. And obviously we can infer that Japheth was originally Black too. But this is the lie that starts. People who are of Black skin, dark skin, brown skin, these people are cursed. They stand out as being cursed among humanity, because essentially they are a descendant of Ham, who committed fornication or homosexual acts with Abraham, and for that he cursed him, right? That is where it comes from, the Babylonian Talmud. Now we can say, obviously, if a people are the true Israelites, they know that they would have been Black, they know that their skin would have been dark, and they're carrying a Babylonian Talmud that says, first of all, that no, this is a curse, you are cursed, you are Ham's descendant because you have Black skin. But not just that, they're carrying a book that comes from Palestine, not from East Africa where Yasharel was. They're carrying a book that comes from Judaism. That's a mark or an indication that they are not the original Hebrews. So if you want proof of that, let's go through some sources. We're talking about the Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud. So it's important to emphasize, before the Spanish Inquisition, obviously, people who were Jews inside of Spain, and we're speaking again about Sephardic Jews inside of Spain, they were facing persecution. Now, because of that, they were essentially limited to how much they could practice their religion openly. However, they did manage to publish a Talmud inside of 1482. So this right here was the Guadalajara Talmud. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but reading from this source, it says, the story goes all the way back to the beginnings of the first printing of the Talmud in 1482. The project was interrupted 10 years later when practicing Jews were expelled from Spain. In 1492, many Jews sought refuge in neighboring Portugal, and the printing was continued there in the southern city of Faro until they were expelled from Portugal in 1497. It was at this point, after 1497, that the Spanish edition of the Talmud was lost. So again, for me, researching for this book, researching for my own edification, when I see the Talmud, again, the Babylonian Talmud, following people from Spain to Portugal, and they're called the Sephardic Jews, obviously the thing that rings true is that these people are not coming from the real line of the Hebrews, that these people are practicing Judaism. Now, another sign of Judaism is Kabbalah. Like I said, these people also had Kabbalah being practiced. And if you don't know what Kabbalah is, it is one of the hallmarks of Judaism. Literally, on a literal point, it's basically just Jewish witchcraft. But obviously, it's something that was common inside of a lot of Jewish communities, but it was also something that was being practiced inside of Spain amongst the Sephardic Jews. From the 13th through the 15th century, the Iberian Peninsula was home of most major Kabbalists. The third stage of the development of the Jewish mystical thought grew naturally out of the 12th century schools. The basic grounds on which European Jewish mysticism would stand have been prepared by the Ashkenazi under the leadership of Eleazar ben Judah of Worms, who wrote a key commentary on Sefer Yetzirah. And two Spanish groups, one based in Girona, was inspired by Isaac the Blind, while the other, a more elite gathering, was led by Nachmanides and centered in Barcelona. When the Ashkenazi group faded in the second half of the 13th century, the Spaniards came to the fore, incorporating their German brethren's thought into their own. Over the next 2 centuries, until the Jews were expelled from Spain in 1492, the Iberian nation would be the center of Kabbalistic writing and thinking. So Kabbalah is another very important mark of the Revelations 2:9 folk, or of the Rabbinical Judaism faith. And this is something that it has to be emphasized. Many times throughout history, we do see a unity between the Sephardic Jews and the Ashkenazi Jews. And as we see right here, they essentially picked up the torch of practicing Kabbalah inside of Spain after the Ashkenazi Jews basically started to fade in history at that point. So these are things that I consider, again, maybe that's not convincing to you. I'm not offended. That's fine. There's other more important things for you to accept. To me, the biggest thing being that, listen, regardless of if you're Hebrew, Jew, whatever you are, that you know that Yahushua HaMashiach is the Messiah, that he is coming back, and that he is the one who has to be our center. That's a message that I post on this channel that is more necessary to me. And these things are historical contexts about piecing together a puzzle, but these things are not going to lead anyone to salvation. So when I say your opinions are welcomed, but again, this is what led me to this point as far as taking a different position than many others have taken about the Sephardic Jews. Now, again, we're going to talk about who are the Hebrews, who are the ones who come from Ethiopia. And again, I'm looking for people who have that Ethiopic origin story, a people whose bloodline can be traced to that Ethiopic region, can be traced and connected to people like the Oromo. Those are the people who I am looking for. We're not going to get into that in this video. I do want to wrap up, though, talking about one more people, the Fulani. And this whole Fulani thing, I think, painted to me the fact that who's a Hebrew, who's not a Hebrew. I think a lot of people have it in their minds that it's like simple, like, okay, you are 100% Hebrew, you are 100% of Esau, you are 100% not, like, that's the clean cut version of the story. In my opinion, that is completely off. The fact is that, number one, a lot of us have other people mixed into us. I mean, obviously, many of us are descendants, unfortunately, of rapist slave owners. Let's just be real. A lot of us have blood of people who were oppressing our grandmothers and grandfathers. Like, a lot of us have that blood running through us. So that's not something that should be surprising. In the same way, many of us are going to have blood that we can identify as being Edomite. And one of those people are the Fulani. The Fulani are people who were taken in the slave trade, just like other tribes were taken in the slave trade. The Fulani is different, though, in that they have a very clear relationship with our oppressors inside of Africa, particularly the Arabs. So let's talk about them. So many of you probably are familiar with the Fulani. They're really a dispersed group throughout many African countries. I've seen them a lot inside of Ghana. They tend to be herders really from up north. But essentially, they have their origin with the Berbers and also the interaction between them and the West Africans, okay? So the Fulani, who are also known as the Turube, may have originally been Jewish, as they are believed to have Judeo-Syrian origins. Their history seems to begin around the 8th century CE, when North African Berbers migrated south and mixed with people in the Senegal region of West Africa. So that's something worth emphasizing before we go on. They were originally believed to be of Jewish origin, the Fulani, okay? That's important to emphasize because what did we say already? When people are identified by mainstream culture, right, as, oh, these people originally in history had Jewish origin, are they talking about the Hebrews that come from East Africa, or are they talking about people who come from practices of Judaism? Practices of Judaism. They are originally known to have practiced Judaism. It's not the case anymore. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. So they were really the first group inside of Africa to, on mass scale, convert to Islam. And today it's like 99% of Fulani are basically Islam. So they're pretty much Islam. With that, though, is a conflict, because what we see with the Fulani throughout history is that they collaborated with the Arabs in their takeover of Africa and also the indoctrination of Africans with the Islamic religion. So they were basically agents, you would say, middlemen between the Arabs and also the Africans. So I'm reading from Conspiracy to Erase a Nation. Fulani became instrumental in upholding Islamic teachings and ideologies in centers such as Timbuktu, as well as working with the Berber and the Arabian Islamic clerics to chart the spread of Islam in West Africa. Because of this, the Fullah led many jihads or holy wars, which spread Islam in West Africa, establishing them as a political and economic power. Today, Fulanis are spread over many countries, predominantly in West Africa, but also in Central Africa and East Africa, including Mauritania, Senegal, Guinea, Gambia, Mali, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, Benin, Burkina Faso, Guinea-Bissau, Cameroon, Ivory Coast, Niger, Togo, the Central African Republic, Ghana, Liberia, and Sudan in the east. And something else very interesting about the Fulani is that they are believed to be the group that essentially chased the Ashanti into the central region of Ghana. The general belief is that the Fantis, Ashanti, the Wasawa, and all tree-speaking or Akan people were originally one tribe. They were a pastoral community and inhabited the open country beyond before being pushed into the forest belt and further north. A northern and lighter-skinned people, commonly believed to have been the Fulani, began encroaching on their territory, seizing their cattle and young women, and enslaving their people. Fleeing these oppressive forces, the Akans began to migrate into the forest where they lived in hiding. When the population grew numerous, their oppressors sought after them. But being able to fight in the dense forest, the people lived in peace and continued to thrive, and gradually extended further south, populating the forest belt and eventually reaching the coast. So let's emphasize again, many of us, from being descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, have blood from the Ashantis. Particularly, really, if you are a brother or sister from Jamaica, like, you definitely have Ashanti blood. Many of us also have Fulani blood, because I'm sure all of you know that when people were taken, different tribes were taken, they weren't keeping them separate. I mean, you basically had everyone being put into slave ships, not based on their tribe, but based on, well, sometimes based on the tribe, because some tribes were preferred by certain peoples, but for the most part, they were putting people in. They sent you from one slave castle to the next slave castle, all along amongst the coast. There was no idea of keeping you separate for, for the voyage, essentially. So because of that, as well as having Hebrew blood, many of us probably have some Fulani. Does that change your position in Yah? Does that change the position inside of the kingdom? No, it doesn't change your position if you are of Yasharel. And Yasharel, we know today, is not a physical reality as much as a spiritual reality. The regathered tribes of Yasharel, where we know it's not just going to be people who are of the bloodline, but also people who are not of the bloodline. So what about people who are of mixed bloodline? If you are redeemed by the blood of Yahushua HaMashiach, then these things should not concern you. But that is really all I have for this presentation. So as I said, we're going to go forward and we're going to talk more about the different tribes that definitely have a link to the original people who come from Ethiopia. And so we're going to be talking about genetics, things like DNA. We're going to get a little into that, but also talk about culture and talk about different traditions that are unequivocally Hebrew. And we're going to talk about what I think is actually the mark of what you can kind of tell someone in history comes from a Hebrew from a Hebrew background. And again, in my opinion, it's not that person being identified as Jew as much as other things surrounding that community that can go under can go under the radar unless you're looking for these particular traits. But that's all I have. Thank you all for watching. And y'all willing, I'll see you in the next video.